A field in Jiangsu Province, 2021. A rusting, gutted Airbus A320 sits abandoned in the weeds, stripped of its paint, its seats, its engines, almost everything that once made it a working aircraft. For nearly 2 decades, nobody outside a small circle of engineers knew what had happened to that plane. It landed in China in the early 2000s, flew for a short while, and then simply stopped appearing anywhere. No passenger manifests, no flight logs, no paper trail at all. Then, in a French documentary, a former head of France's Foreign Intelligence Service said out loud what insiders had whispered for years. That jet hadn't crashed, it hadn't been quietly retired, it had been taken apart bolt by bolt, studied, measured, and used as the blueprint for China's first homegrown airliner, the C919. That's a headline-grabbing story, and it's the one most people know, the kind of tale that gets repeated at dinner parties. But it isn't the interesting part. The interesting part is what happened after the copying was supposedly finished. China spent well over a decade and tens of billions of dollars building a jet that was, according to multiple accounts, reverse-engineered from a Western original, right down to details most passengers would never think to notice. It rolled out a plane that looks like an A320, seats passengers like an A320, and was marketed as a direct rival to the A320. And then, when it came time to actually sell the thing to the world, almost nobody outside China wanted it. Not the airlines desperate for aircraft, not the leasing companies sitting on cash, not a single carrier anywhere in Europe, the Americas, the Middle East, or even Southeast Asia, where Chinese money and Chinese influence usually open doors. Think about how strange that is for a second. This isn't some obscure prototype nobody's heard of. Airlines everywhere are currently begging for aircraft. Fleets are aging, routes are being cut, and the two companies that normally supply the world's planes are both years behind on their own order books. This should have been the easiest sales environment in the history of commercial aviation for a determined new entrant to break through. Instead, the C919 has spent years circling the runway of global relevance without ever actually taking off commercially beyond its own borders. Watched closely, but ordered by almost nobody. So here's the real question, the one worth spending the next few minutes on. If you can steal the design, why can't you steal the success that comes with it? Start with why this plane exists at all. For most of the last 50 years, building a narrow-body airliner from scratch has been a two-company game. Boeing and Airbus split the world between them, and everyone else, Embraer, Bombardier, later Mitsubishi, fought over the scraps at the edges of the market. China watched this duopoly for decades while quietly building the ambition to break into it. The state-owned aircraft maker COMAC was handed a mandate that went beyond ordinary industrial policy. Build a jet that proves China can do what only 2 countries on Earth have ever done well. And COMAC didn't just want a competent regional jet. It wanted the crown jewel of commercial aviation, a mainline narrowbody that airlines would order by the hundreds. The C919 was the answer, unveiled with enormous fanfare as China's ticket into an exclusive club. On paper, the timing looked perfect. Boeing spent the back half of the 2000s and the early 2020s dealing with 2 fatal 737 MAX crashes, a worldwide grounding, whistleblower testimony, and a door plug that blew off an airplane mid-flight in 2024. Airbus, meanwhile, was drowning in its own order book, unable to expand production fast enough to cover the gap Boeing left behind. Wait times for a new A320, Neo, or 737. MAX stretched past a decade. If there was ever a moment for a credible third option to walk through the door, this was it. A serious competitor could have mopped up frustrated airlines desperate for anything with wings and a delivery date attached. Instead, the C919 has secured barely any interest outside its home market, and understanding why means walking through exactly how this jet came to exist and exactly what it's missing. Go back to that ghost plane in the field for a second, because the mechanics matter here. According to the French officials who eventually spoke publicly, the process wasn't a single dramatic heist. It was patient, methodical, and spread out over years. A former Airbus counterintelligence official described it plainly. The goal was never to build an exact copy of a single jet. It was to understand every system well enough to recreate the function, even if the execution stayed years behind. That distinction turns out to be the whole story. You can disassemble a wing, measure its curvature, photograph its spars, and still not know how to manufacture a wing that performs identically at altitude, in turbulence, in a hailstorm, after 15 years of fatigue cycles. Airbus and Boeing didn't earn their duopoly by drawing the right shapes. They earned it through 80 combined years of crashes, near misses, redesigns, supplier failures, and hard-won fixes, all of it baked into certification standards that took decades to write. Copying the shape of a jet gets you a jet that looks right in a press photo. It doesn't get you the accumulated scar tissue of an entire industry, the thousands of tiny, unglamorous lessons that never make it into a spec sheet, but end up saving lives anyway. And scar tissue, as unglamorous as it sounds, is exactly what airlines are paying for when they choose Boeing or Airbus over anyone else. Now look at what COMAC actually built, because the specifications tell a story the marketing never will. The C919 is routinely described as a clean sheet, 21st century design, and mechanically that's true. It has none of the compromises that come from decades-old airframes like the 737s, which still traces its lineage back to the 1960s. Yet despite that fresh start, independent estimates suggest the vast majority of the aircraft's critical components, somewhere north of 9 in every 10 parts by value, are sourced from non-Chinese suppliers. Engines from CFM, avionics from Honeywell and Collins, landing gear, and hydraulics from established Western firms. That's not necessarily damning on its own. Plenty of successful aircraft programs are genuinely international. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Those same Western suppliers, wary of China's track record on intellectual property, have reportedly held back their newest technology from COMAC. The engine COMAC uses, a variant of the CFM LEAP family, is widely reported to be a detuned version of the same engine powering the A320neo and 737 MAX, built with older core technology rather than the latest generation. The result is a jet with a real-world range hovering around 2,200 nautical miles, well short of what its Western rivals offer, and nowhere near enough to make the C919 a viable long-haul feeder for most global route networks. China built a modern airframe and wrapped it around a decades-old heart, and in aviation, the engine is not a detail, it's the whole argument. Then there's the order book, which looks impressive until you actually open it. COMAC advertises well over 1,000 orders, a number that on its face beats out established Western programs like the Airbus A320. But pull the list apart and the pattern becomes obvious almost immediately. The overwhelming majority of buyers are Chinese state-owned airlines or Chinese leasing firms, many of them ultimately answering to the same government ministries that own COMAC itself. That's not a customer base. That's a parent company writing checks to its own subsidiary and calling it market validation. Genuine international demand, the kind where an airline in Jakarta or Lagos or Sao Paulo weighs its options and picks the C919 on merit, is essentially non-existent. Even carriers with every incentive to diversify away from Boeing and Airbus, and there are plenty given the current wait times, have declined to place a single firm order. When a product this scarce still can attract outside buyers during the worst aircraft shortage in modern aviation history, that tells you something the sales brochure never will. Reliability compounds the problem, and this is where China's broader industrial reputation actually works against it. Consumers everywhere trust Chinese manufacturing for smartphones, solar panels, and electric vehicles built at staggering scale, and often genuinely high quality that outperforms far more expensive rivals. Aircraft manufacturing plays by different rules entirely. A phone that fails costs you a bad review and a refund request. An engine mount that fails at 38,000 feet costs lives, and airlines know it. China's aerospace track record outside commercial jets hasn't helped build confidence either. Myanmar's Air Force reportedly grounded much of its fleet of Chinese-built JF-17 fighters after recurring technical failures, while the American F-16 it was meant to rival has logged decades of dependable service worldwide. Fair or not, that kind of history follows a country into a new program, and airlines making a billion-dollar fleet decision don't have room for the benefit of the doubt. Every airline safety board, every insurance underwriter, every pilot's union, weighing whether to approve a new type into their fleet is quietly running the same calculation. Not, is this jet good, but what happens to my airline's reputation if this jet is wrong? That calculation almost never favors the newcomer, no matter how many press releases insist otherwise. And even if every technical and reputational hurdle vanished overnight, COMAC still runs into the most unglamorous obstacle of all. It simply cannot build these jets fast enough. Production began back in 2011, and over a decade later, the company has delivered only a small handful of aircraft. Nowhere close to even one per month, let alone one per day, which is roughly the combined output Boeing and Airbus manage between them. COMAC has talked about ramping toward over 100 jets a year by the end of this decade, but getting a factory from building single digits annually to triple digits is one of the hardest problems in industrial manufacturing, harder in some ways than designing the plane itself. Airlines don't just need a good aircraft, they need hundreds of them, delivered on a predictable schedule backed by a global network of spare parts depots and certified maintenance crews standing ready in Toronto, Nairobi, and everywhere in between. Boeing and Airbus built that scaffolding over half a century, one hangar, one training program, one regional parts warehouse at a time, until a broken part in almost any city on Earth could be replaced within a day or two. COMAC is trying to build that entire scaffolding from a standing start in a single decade, while also trying to convince the world its engines aren't secondhand. Here's a way to think about the gap. Imagine two chefs asked to open a restaurant overnight. One studied at culinary school for 20 years, burned 1,000 dishes learning exactly why they burned, and built relationships with suppliers who'll rush a special order at 6 a.m. without being asked twice. The other watched the first chef cook one incredible meal through a kitchen window, wrote down every ingredient, and opened the doors the very next day. The second restaurant might genuinely nail the recipe. It might even taste identical on a good night. But nobody is walking in blind and trusting that kitchen with a wedding banquet for 400 guests, because a recipe was never the hard part. The hard part was surviving every disaster that happens between the first attempt and the 10,000th. And there is no shortcut through that, no matter how good your notes are. That's the C919 in one image, a recipe copied faithfully, served in a kitchen that hasn't yet earned the world's trust. And the uncomfortable truth for COMAC is that most diners don't even need to taste the food to make up their minds. They just need to hear where the chef trained, and for how long, before they decide whether tonight is the night they take the risk. None of this means China's aviation ambitions collapse here. COMAC has time, state backing that borders on unlimited, and a domestic market so enormous it can sustain the program for years on Chinese orders alone, regardless of whether a single foreign airline ever signs a contract. Boeing and Airbus executives aren't laughing this off either. Privately and publicly, both companies have acknowledged that China represents a genuine long-term threat. Not because the C919 is good today, but because a nation with this much capital and this much patience rarely stays behind forever. Given another 20 years, better engines, a real maintenance network, and airframes that have logged millions of trouble-free hours, the calculus could shift entirely. But that's the point worth sitting with. Reverse engineering can steal a shape in a matter of years. It cannot steal trust. And trust in aviation isn't handed out, It's earned one uneventful flight at a time, thousands upon thousands of them, until an airline stops asking whether a jet will get its passengers home and simply assumes it. Airbus and Boeing didn't win the sky by keeping a secret. They won it by surviving every mistake in public for decades until the rest of the world stopped holding its breath. That ghost plane in the Jiangsu field wasn't just evidence of a theft. It was a monument to the one thing that was never actually available to steal, and until COMAC finds a way to manufacture that missing piece, no clean sheet design and no state subsidy will change the answer international airlines keep quietly giving. Not yet. Maybe not for a long while still.